Casting with Ceri Jones.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. This week's episode, I decided to do something a bit different. I actually spoke with him, I think it was episode 15, and when we chatted last, I realised he had an awful lot of knowledge I needed to get out again. He had such an understanding of river fishing. And I've been brought up predominantly on the reservoirs and lochs and larger still waters. I have to admit, my knowledge of river insects and entomology, like many, is quite limited. So I thought I'd get back in touch with him. For he is in the process of writing a book about river dry fly fishing, where he goes into some depth of the entomology and insect life, which trout feed on in the rivers, most of which he has studied over the years, and his local river, the Usk. Welcome once more to my chat with Mark Roberts. Well, that was a nice coffee.
Absolutely delicious. Subject of a present from my missus.
I'm looking forward. She did say, actually, she's got soup for us after as well. So
homemade by my daughter.
Is it?
Oh yeah. Nice Italian soup.
You got it made?
No, she's got it made.
Well, it's good to see you again. It doesn't seem long since we chatted last. But I knew when I came to see you last time that there's lots more in our head to record from flight tie-in, which again another thing we'll have to do, but something which I'm personally interested in. I've been brought up on the still water scene, on the reservoirs mainly, and I think it's quite common that other anglers in the same position as me, fishing the still water, flies and methods, don't really know enough, I don't anyway personally, on the river insects and entomology. So I thought it'd be good to put something down to address this, you can say. And I thought the one person to contact obviously is yourself, because you're actually not far from finishing a book as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I've just got the fly patterns to do in it. Unfortunately, I've been diverted from finishing the first complete draft, purely and simply because we've been... since July, we've been dealing with a pollution incident on the Limphy. So all our, or certainly mine and Dave Collins's attention has been focused on that to get that right.
And it's mainly fly life, is it? Or fishing techniques as well, the book?
It's actually called My Thoughts on Dry Fly Fishing. So I've done a chapter on tenkara and I've done a chapter on reservoir still water fishing as well. But most of it revolves around river fishing and river techniques. And if I explain how it came about, I was fishing with my son, and he was actually always asking me questions, and he's always wanting to improve his knowledge with it. And I was saying things, and I said, well, this is obviously... He said, no. He said, you have got so much in your head. He said, you think at a different level to everybody else, and you think everybody else is at that level, and they're not. And he said, it confuses people because you're talking about things which are completely obvious to you and completely oblivious to everybody else. So when I ended up having my last surgery and realising that I probably wouldn't be able to get back to the riverbank as previously, he said, well, why don't you write it down? And I thought, okay, I invested in a bit of kit, and it was... What I wanted to do was do something for a beginner and also something for the intermediate and for the people that want to become advanced. So the difficulty was actually getting my thoughts across so people could understand them. at the different levels, and I think I've achieved that. Well, the reader will be the judge of that, but it's a starter for 10.
Yeah.
And somebody said, well, why haven't you done it on other fishing techniques? And I said, well, I can always write other books on different fishing techniques, but dry fly for me is the ultimate. It's so visual, and you're so part of it, and I suppose really it really brings out the hunter instinct in you, and the fact that you know there's a fish there because you've seen it rise. So now you've got to interpret it, what it's taking, view what it's taking, and have that cognitive knowledge behind you, knowing what time of year it is, what time of day it is, what stage the fly is likely to be in its life cycle, what is the actual species of the fly, then pick a general imitation of that pattern.
So your knowledge of the entomology and the fly life on a river predominantly is self-taught?
Out of necessity.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people have been fishing there for days and not caught anything because they've been fishing with the wrong fly? And then somebody who knows will quite often, quite kindly, because that's why I've hardly got any flies left in my fly box, will say, well, have you caught anything? How are you doing? Oh, no, there's lots of fish moving. No, I haven't. Well, try this one. And they go off and they come back a couple of hours later. So I had 3 fish. You know, it's to me, it's great feeling that sharing of knowledge. But quite often, a lot of people fish the fly that they choose is because it's their favourite fly, because it's of a size that they can see it.
Yeah.
And without any real understanding. And every now and again they have a fantastic day and catch 20, 30 fish.
You put a lot of your knowledge over the years on different blogs and videos, and they're actually on the Gwent Society's webpage, aren't they?
Gwent Angling Society, yeah. There's a lot of fly patterns on there. And when I tie a fly, I try to explain why I'm using the materials I'm using, and what.
That's not just for members. Anyone can go into that.
Yeah, it's something to anybody. It's a resource. Right. We've actually got an article on there on what fly to use, or what flies on the water, which we've also shared with the YNS Foundation and with Fishing Wales. So you can find that article anywhere.
I'll put the links on the story notes so people can have a look at that.
But it's a subject that you need to be aware of, but you don't need a fantastic in-depth knowledge of.
Yeah.
But having said that, you can get engrossed in it, and it's amazing, really.
Yeah. Like the still water scene, the reservoirs, probably the number one feed for trout on a reservoir is buzzers. And it took a while for me to find out, as you just said now, actually. I thought the trout in rivers feed the same on buzzers, because people you're talking about, but they do, but they're just midges, aren't they? They call them midges, that's the difference.
Exactly, they call them midges. And I would probably argue that it is the most often available food source throughout the 12 months for wild brown trout to fish on. I mean, you talk about the difference between still waters and rivers. I think the issue is that still waters, a lot of the fish are introduced and stocked, so can be induced to take flies through aggression by retrieve and speed of retrieve, as well as what they find there naturally to feed upon. Whereas the wild stillwater wild brown trout are normally up in the higher clins, so you're using more traditional patterns because they're always looking up because the food's quite rare and scarce. So I mean, as Alan Parfitt always says, Maladun claret, do me well anywhere, mainly because of heather flies, because they're dark with a bit of red legs. It's that understanding of what you're fishing for. Now, with rivers, the majority of rivers is wild brown trout.
Yeah.
We certainly within our club don't wish to stock any fish. We want to maintain that wild population. It's one of the main reasons why we encourage catch and release, because they're so precious just to be caught the once. And it's quite surprising that how the volume of fish can occur within a short beat. So everybody has enjoyment. So everybody's got the opportunity when they go. The big issue, of course, is that pollution is affecting rivers. I know there's concerns about phosphate levels in rivers, and the Usk is SAC designated, and there's a suspicion that phosphate levels are very high within that river system, as they are in the Wye, and that will affect how the entomology continues to grow. Some species cannot survive it. Some species can. It's ironic. They estimate that probably fly life has dropped by 70% over the last 30 years on the Usk. We're losing species which have been lost to other rivers, but are still on our rivers, such as the yellow mayfly, which is, we know we've still got some of those on the river, but it's really down to just 3 or 4 different areas where they survive.
So what are the main categories you can see?
There are really 4, or you could argue 5 major classifications of trout flies. The one that everybody recognises is the upwing, often referred to as the mayfly, because it has that stick-up wing that everybody sees a fly coming down the river like a sailboat. The species designation of that is Ephemeroptera. It's hard to say with a few beers. And all these are sort of identified by their wing shape or the wing structure. The second main one is the roof wing, or caddis flies, sedge flies, where the wings cover their body and come together like a roof covering, and they're known as Trichoptera. Then you've got flat wing, which is your buzzers, your midges, where the wings cross over each other flat over their body as opposed to being moved, and that's Dipteria. And then the last one really is the hard wing, which are the stoneflies, which has, always think of twos, because it has 2 antennae in the front. It will have 2 parts to its body, the thorax and 2 tails. The Usk has quite a few stoneflies on there, which are half wing, and some are full wing, and some are wingless. But the Usk really doesn't have too many of those, other than in spring. Quite often you sit on the bank and they're crawling all over your pockets and to your neck and all that. That's when you recognise they're about. But fish don't tend, I haven't seen fish take them off the top, so they're there.
Yeah.
And of course, the 5th classification that I alluded to really are the terrestrials, the beetles that blow on the water, the grasshoppers, and other non-specific flies.
Yeah.
You've got to recognise as well that within those flies, they've got a life cycle. They lay eggs. Those eggs developed into nymphs, and depending on the species, those nymphs are either stone clingers, commonly referred to as heptagena, which sort of are flatter in shape, stockier, wider eye and thorax, and you literally, if you pick a stone up and turn it over, you'll see like a bit of algae move, and it's a stone clinger. It hangs on in the flow. And then you've got the baitids, which is the agile darter, which is where the nymph will actually swim in between the stones, and they actually migrate through the river at different times. and they move about and move completely differently to the way stone clingers move. And then they develop from the nymphal stage to emerging, and some different species emerge differently to others. And it's them recognizing how they're emerging and when they're emerging. They form into the dun, which is the adult fly, which is quite often a little bit duller. It's got more colour in the wing. And that is known, as well as the dun, it's subimago. And then they'll get off the river and they take shelter in trees or bushes, and they'll go through another metamorphosis and change from duns to spinners, where they become more clear and see-through, and then they mate in the air in what's known as a spinner dance, quite often seen with traditional Danica vulgata, which is the traditional mayfly, known from Duffer's Week, but all the flies do it, and you'll see a mass of them dancing together up and down over the river, and the females then go back to the river, lay their eggs, and they'll either, some species will crawl down rocks and crawl down weeds into the river, and will sow their eggs close to the margins. Others will float over the top, and those are obviously what the fishermen are interested into. They lay their eggs, and then they just die on the top, and the fish quite often just suck in the spinners spent because it's easy meal.
Yeah. So, like, I've seen this with mayflies, but that's still the same with like olives and other.
Oh, absolutely. It's just, none of them are actually born with mouth parts, so they can't eat.
That's why they only last 12 hours or thereabouts, they say.
Well, 24 hours in actual fact.
All right.
And the spinners, I mean, people say, it's quite funny in the summer. I've been coming back to the car at 6 o'clock in the morning when people are arriving nice and early, and they're going there to fish for early emergers before the heat of the day gets up. Yet they've missed the best hatch from sunrise, which early summer would be about 3 in the morning, right, when the spinners are falling and laying their eggs, particularly from a balmy night, and you can have some tremendous sport between 3:30 and 5:30 when it's all finished. Go back, have a cup of tea, and get the rest of your day done.
So would you prefer to be that time than the evening?
I like to catch fish.
Yeah.
So it's utilising the knowledge that you have in order to be able to catch those fish. You can fish a spinner last thing at night as well, and it works tremendously well. But quite often some people say, the fall didn't happen. Right? There's nothing moving. And of course, for trout fishing, you can only fish from an hour before to an hour after sunset. Right, and quite often these hatches or these falls can fall a lot later than when you're allowed to fish. So it's just getting the time right. I mean, there's always a fall of spinner when a particular species is hatching. It's just when.
So they don't lay their eggs then in the evening all the time. It's quite possible then, or quite probable, or many times they do it in the morning.
Absolutely. I do you not go out all night sometimes and have a good time?
Only Cardiff. I see what you mean, yeah. Because very often, more often than not, when I'm on the Carib, evening time, you're going in, or late afternoon more often than not, you're going in to an island to have a bit of a bite to eat or something, and you see this dancing, like say, they're up and down, and down. So then I think then that's the time they actually go to the lake, back to the water to lay their eggs, and then they're spent. But they actually do all that in the morning as well.
Oh, yeah. If you're not there to view it, how do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, most people, anybody with any sense, they're tucked up in bed at 4 or 5, and they'll think, oh, I'll get up early and go. What is your early is not necessarily what is the fly's late.
Like what I found, the best time to fish the mayfly time of day is when they hatch. What I found is more often than not, about 11 o'clock in the morning, you get the fly coming off.
Right. And
so those flies that are coming off are being hatched out at 11 o'clock. They won't necessarily go back to the water in the evening. They could wait till the following morning.
One of the big things, if you're fishing in spring, quite often it's only worthwhile fishing between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. The main 3 hatches that you're going to get at that time of year are March browns, hence the name, and the season starts on the 3rd of March. You're going to get, this is upwings now, you're going to get dark olives, which should have been hatching from about January, February, although they can hatch all year. And then you'll get iron blue duns, if you've got them there. Now, iron blue duns tend to come out literally when it's snowing, and they prefer the colder waters, and fish, they must taste like toffees, because you can have a huge hatch of any other fly with just a few iron blue duns coming in, and the fish will feed only on the iron blue duns. But again, because of the state of our rivers, you don't see so many iron blue duns as you used to.
Is there?
So you've got these flies hatching. They hatch once the water temperature has risen sufficient enough, not air temperature, water temperature, sufficient enough to encourage them to hatch. Right, now they quite often hatch in areas of riffled water because the meniscus is broken. Certainly March browns do, and they come out, and then you'll see them floating on the glides at the end of the tails, and the fish will sit there and pick them off. Now, with that, how can you say that the water's warmed up when it's been freezing through the night, and quite often it's snowing in March? So is it temperature or is it daylight? And I actually think it's a combination of all the factors, So they come off there, and they come off in hatches of between 2 minutes and up to about 20 minutes. Very rarely have I seen a continual hatch of March brown lasting longer than 45 minutes. Right, so they come in bursts. Now, I can tell you with March browns, you have to be ready. And quite often, the March browns coming off first thing in the season, you're unpracticed, you're unorganised, and many a time the hatch will start and you're into a blind panic, taking one fly off for another fly, and you cast out, and the first thing is you literally hook your pants, or you catch the back of your collar, or you get your fly tangled, and by the time you sorted it, it's over.
As quick as that, is it?
Oh, it can be as quick as I was with a good mate of mine, Paul Mason, and we were fishing there, and I said, I think the March brown's finished for the day. We'd had 2 or 3 hatches, and all of a sudden, bump, and we was literally stood in 4 inches of water, and the hatch was prolific. There was thousands of them just appeared, and there was fish moving in between our feet to take the flies, and you would have sworn there was nothing there.
So you could have more than one hatch in a day.
Oh yeah. They come sporadically, and then you will still have a spinner fall. Right, but most people, because of the cold, right, because they don't want to wait from 4 till it goes dark, will they bother to fish the spinnerful?
Do you find there's a difference between, say, an iron blue and a March brown, the type of rise, or is it just a visual? You just got to see the insect?
No, absolutely. And this is one of the things when you get mass hatches that you really, if you're not catching with what you think is fishing, you've got to observe and perhaps change your tactics. Rise forms will denote quite often the type of fly that the fish are feeding on. It will also denote the rise form, because with a larger fly like a March Brown, it's quite often a big splashy gloop, and you can hear it. You'll hear it before you see it. A slashing rise is quite often to a large fly like a March Brown, or a large brook dun, or a sedge pattern often gets slashed at, right? Because it excites the fish. And it's a big mouthful. Whereas your iron blue duns are quite often just sipped, just tiny little kiss of the water almost. Because one thing to remember here is the size of the rise does not dictate the size of the fish. And I was fishing down at Timau one day, and there was a guy on the other bank, and he was watching me fish, and he said, oh, they're only dace rising there, aren't they? And I said, what makes you think that? He said, well, the rises are tiny. And I said, oh, you think they're dace, do you? And with that, then I hooked into a 2-pound fish. And he said, they're not dace then. I said, no, I think you find they're trout. And there was a lot of minnows taking stuff at that time as well. But don't ever ignore the smallest pinhead dimple on the river, because it quite often can be your biggest fish.
I found that in still waters as well, mind. I was fishing our water up in mid Wales a few years ago now. Tried a bryn, cribbing, and it was a stocked water it was, but they had 3 lakes, and a very, very top lake, they had some browns in it. Nice, good sized browns, some of them. And right up the top then, people never fish because it was very shallow. And it's where, it was, I don't know, 2 foot, somebody got 3 foot. And I had a successful afternoon, and then I just walked up to the top. Then I watched this little brown, which I thought was, I would say, about 8 ounces, which again, I thought it was dimple here, dimple there. And I cast up into it, and it was a 7-pound rainbow.
Yeah.
Even a rainbow, But I think it was because it was calm. So anything that was hatching off, which I guess they were at the time, they were midges, they were just stuck in the film. So they had all the time they were dimple, just cruising along, mopping them up.
So something to be aware of, you're dead right. The size of the rise can indicate what insect is actually coming off or what they're feeding on. And people have got to recognise that it takes fish quite a while to actually switch on to the main species that's hatching. So until the hatches build up to such a level that they think, that's food, I've got to eat that, and the trigger point's on it, then they won't actually feed upon it. It depends, and throughout the year things will change. The one thing you have to be is not stuck in your ways. If I go fishing and I see fish move, I will cast. I'll pick up the fly that I think should be used, having done my observations beforehand. I'll then cast and fish it over. I'll then, if it doesn't take, I'll move 6 inches, so it comes at a slight different angle. I cast again, and it'll either work or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I'll cast a 3rd time, then I'll change my fly. Now, I might not change my pattern, but I will change the fly. And what I'm actually changing is I might be changing from a different profiled hook. So the fly fishes in a separate or in a different depth. And it might be a change of a millimetre or 2.
Yeah.
All right. So I then cast out again, and I'll cast 3 times, and I'll keep moving. And if that doesn't work, then I'll try the same pattern again. And then I start to doubt whether that pattern's working. And then I fish again. And quite often I'll take it. And now I quite often take the fish after the first change, because experience just tells me the way the rise is. And it's the rise that will tell you everything what that fish is doing.
Do you find that midge is overlooked on a river?
Most people that don't know don't fish them, but I wouldn't be without them at all. Certainly in the summer, where you've got low flows, you've got warm water, not too warm, because I wouldn't recommend anybody goes fishing for trout when it's over 18 degrees, the water temperature, because the fish just won't survive. It's just not right. If we're fishing catch and release, then you've just got to suck it up and leave it alone. Yeah. Tiny midge comes into its own. I've fished down to size 30. This is an adult midge I've got, right? And then you've got black gnats as well, which are also midge-like. This is a deer hair wing-shaped one, right? Nice. With one strand of micro sparkle underneath it. But I've fished patterns before like black gnat, and the fish were only taking the egg-laden females, so the abdomens were extended, right? So if I didn't have a fat back or fat bottom on my fly, they weren't taking it. So instead of just doing a black silk covered basic hook, I picked the ones with not extended body, but a fatter body.
It's like an ant style.
Yeah, almost ant style. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then boom, every fish, boom, 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 and that was the difference. You see, if you're fishing, there's a term that I use.
You wouldn't think that a trout got that much time to notice as the fly's coming over.
Right.
The profile.
Trout are lazy. They sit in an area that is most comfortable for them, with the opportunity of not expending any energy at all if they can. So quite often they'll be as close to the edge in 2 inches of water where food is coming down, perhaps in a seam or a crease, and they're just picking it out. The problem is, as anglers, we stomp up and down the river instead of gently stalking towards the edge of the water, and we're forcing the fish into the deeper water already. Instead of getting into a position slowly back from the river and just watch the river. Quite often I have spent hours just sat there watching everything going by, and it's not just about the fish and the fishing. I've seen hobbies flying about. I've chasing swifts. I've seen peregrines come out from heights, and all you've heard, whoosh, and you see a pile of feathers as it's hit a pigeon. It's just an opportunity to watch, and you pick up use all your senses, not just your eyes, but your ears as well, and your smell. It's just, I'm talking to you now, and I'm there on the riverbank.
Yeah. So you're on your hands and knees, smelling the grass, and like Alan Reese is 30 meters up. oh no, I won't be on my knees then, that's for sure.
But
a year to the ground, like Tonto.
What's this week, you must be.
So we're looking at, in the spring, like you said, you got your March browns, the dark olives.
You follow a route.
Yeah.
You have your March browns at start, then you go into your dark olives, and then you have probably one of the best hatches that starts on the Usk, which can last anything between 2 days and a fortnight, is the Granum.
Right.
The Granum sedge.
What time of the year?
April. You can almost put it down to the date.
Yeah.
Round about the 14th of April, something around there. It might be a week before, it might be a week after, it might be 2 weeks after. But a lot of people used to confuse a Granum hatch with a March Brown hatch, because you used to get the same numbers of March Browns coming off. There'd be thousands upon thousands of these little flotillas coming down the river. It used to be fantastic. And then we had a period on the Usk where they went.
Did they?
Yeah, and then they have reoccurred about 5 years ago, following a huge flood. And we think what's happened is the surviving species have been pushed out of the brooks during the flood and have repopulated the river.
Oh, right.
So
they stayed in the brooks at that time when they disappeared in the river?
Well, they weren't affected by any agricultural pollution because the brooks were high up and away from agriculture.
So they would hatch evening?
No.
So you wouldn't see sedge. People automatically think sedge it's an evening.
No. You're talking from 10 o'clock in the morning through till 4 in the afternoon. Fantastic. I mean, it's like standing in a snow flurry when you get a really good hatch. And they always fly upstream and quite often into the wind, but always upstream because they're always travelling upriver. So the eggs drop back downriver.
All right.
Right.
So as soon as the instinct is, as soon as they hatch, they fly upriver.
Absolutely. Because what people aren't aware of is that the caddisflies or the sedge are actually a far more advanced, what's the word I'm looking for? Evolution fly. So where an upwing has to go through a number of processes, egg, nymph, then into a dun, which is subimago, then has to change into a sexually mature spinner as an imago, right? The sedge has 3 eggs, pupa, adult, and it's born and it comes out on top of the water as sexually mature.
So that will hatch literally constant. They'll be hatched throughout the day.
Unbelievable. And I used to have a real difficulty catching them because there were so many of these flies. And I used to fish 2 flies. One was a green-bodied elk hair sedge, and the other was a CDC in elk. It used to take fish, but it wouldn't take as many fish as I thought it should have.
Yeah.
And Dave Collins recommended me to a pattern that he uses, which he designed, which is an emerging pupa. And I tied a few up, and what a revelation. What a revelation that was, because I went out and I had, in 6 casts, I had 6 fish, and not one of them was under 2 pounds. They were all in the same sort of scene down the edge of this bank. On the far bank it was. So. And
what was the main difference to that fly? What you've been fishing before?
Well, this was actually subsurface, except for the CDC which held it up, and it was there as the emerging pupa. Because if you caught a fish, they're absolutely full of granum. They just pick them off like Smarties. I'll show you a picture later if you like, or if you look on the Gwent Angling Society website, there's a whole tutorial there on the granum sedge, right? And Dave's emerging pattern, and there's a video where I actually tie it and show it and explain how it works. But that, it's got a wider back, it's got a wider body, and then it comes narrow into its thorax, then it goes thicker on the thorax, it's got wing buds on it. It just works.
Do you find that sometimes they can get preoccupied where you'll get the full adult on the surface coming down, or the emerger just come in? Seeing as 2 coming down, would they specifically go for one and then they'll ignore the dries a certain time? They're in the zone where they think, I'm on emergers today.
Well, I think what happens when you see them on the water, most of the trout are full of the pupa, because the pupa rises from the bottom of the river, and they're feeding on them all the time. You're not getting the indication until you see them taking the pupa in the upper surface.
Yeah.
Right, and I think by the time the adults are on the river, right, and coming back to egg lay,
they've already been feeding.
They're stuffed. Honestly, they're full as an egg. It is incredible how many of these insects that they can take at any one time. And I'm talking of thousands.
And that will last a couple of weeks.
2 weeks, that's all, if you're lucky.
Right.
And then they've gone. And then you've then got a short period there where you've still got the dark olive coming off. You get yellow May emergers starting to appear. Yeah, yellow May emergers were or yellow May duns, which a lot of people around the locality call yellow sallies.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Right. Yellow sally is a stonefly.
Yeah, it's different.
Right. It's entirely different, but because it's yellow and they think it looks like a sally, they call it a yellow sally.
Yeah.
Yellow May duns are entirely different.
Can't mistake the bright yellow.
Oh, sulphur yellow. Yeah. Or sulphur maize, as the Americans call them. But it's quite funny. I spoke to Kerry Thomas. I said, I think they taste bitter because the fish don't like them. But because of the lack of the other insects out there, they've got to eat them because there's nothing else. And he said, oh, no, he said, they taste really bitter. And I said, you've eaten them? And he said, yeah. He said, I've tasted them. He said,
I usually take sandwiches.
but he said, we had this bad minute, he said, when we were there, and he said, no, we had to eat them. He said we had to find out why they weren't taking them.
One of the finest memorable times I had was between Loch Mask and Loch Colib. There's a section called the canal. This is the dry canal. But along that section, there's one or two pools. They're just little lakes they are. And it's all wooded all round. And it's like your own little world. It's beautiful. And this one day I was there fishing. And these yellow May duns hatched off, right? I had never seen anything in my life, right? It was a race between the swallows and the trout taking them.
Yeah.
You know, I just stopped fishing. I just sat there and watched them. The trout were coming up, the birds are coming down, and they were having a hell of a time, you know.
What is different about that insects to others is it's a stone clinger, right? It's a Heptugena. So the nymph is clinging to a stone. Now, what is unique about the yellow May dun is that the majority of them, they emerge from the nymph clinging to the stone and go up as an adult to the top of the water. And as soon as they break the meniscus film, they have this sort of explosion of blood into their wing. The wing is formed and they're gone. Because if you notice with yellow May duns, they're there and then they're not. There's none of this struggle in the water or they just pop gone. Yeah. They just appear. And that's why. Because they've actually swam through as a full adult to go through the surface. So it's very rare that you actually get crippled yellow May duns stuck on the water. Because otherwise you'd all be crippled and stuck underneath the surface, wouldn't they? Yeah. That's why you need a different type of nymph to catch them, and that was another. And
that would be sort of middle of May time you get them here, is it?
Well, no, yellow May duns, no, they'll start April.
Would they?
Yeah, I mean the majority of flies that you've got coming is you've got midge all year round. You've got large dark olives all year round. You've then got March browns from March through to April, then the granum from April. Then you've got older flies. Now, some rivers they were, and it looks like a sedge. I don't bother fishing them because I don't see many trout on them. Although I see them by the river, I don't see many trout feeding on them. And that's April to June. Also in April, you've got the stoneflies coming off. But again, I don't fish them. Then April.
Why wouldn't you fish the stonefly?
I don't see fish taking them.
Right.
And they're quite a big fly. But so, it's a tying exercise. But unlike in America where you've got the salmon fly, which is a stonefly, right? If you've seen where a river runs through it, that's a fly that catches that big fish that he then goes for a swim about 4 miles down the ravine. That's a fly called a salmon fly, which is a stonefly. But we don't have that size of hatch to make it worthwhile.
Right.
But then probably one of the best hatches that comes out, most people don't recognise them because they think they're large dark olives, is the olive upright, right? Which is the fish love. It's a bigger fly, or really, I think it's about the same size as a large dark olive, but it's a good mouthful. But they hatch from April through to October.
So the dark olive, that would go through all the way through as well, would it?
Yeah, dark olive now and again, but it's more of a cold weather fly. But other flies will take over. You see, by May time, you've got nearly all the species hatching.
Yeah.
And you'll get a period in May which can be really frustrating because you'll see all these fish moving, and you've got to go through a process with each fish to decide what it's eating and how it's eating.
When you fish in dries on the river, do you fish a single dry?
I always do, yeah. You have to. On the river, you have to. Otherwise, you have... The golden rule for me, whether you're fishing upstream or downstream, because you can fish a dry either upstream or downstream, right? It must fish with drag-free drift. Now, I explain how to make them, and this is part of the book. This is where the idea of the book comes from, is that I fish articulated leaders.
Yeah, you showed me that.
Which will extend the amount of drift that you have, because the river, your leader, no matter how perfect your cast is going to be affected by several seams and different flow rates within the river.
But the articulated cast is more effective than a tapered cast.
Yeah. Well,
a through tapered cast.
Well, if you got a through taper, then the fly is connected directly to the end of your line by your leader.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the tapering allows it to be presented delicately. But what actually happens is, as soon as that hits on the water, there's no giving that. So you've got to cast it with slack line. And that means casting it with controlled slack line, right? So that means perhaps using a reach mend or different styles of cast to put the slack in the right place, which gets you around. And this is the joys of dry fly fishing, which gets you around the issues that you've got with a particular type of seam that you're fishing. Whereas with the articulated leaders, it doesn't pull directly on the fly because the leader is able to articulate, literally. So it's not pulling the fly straight away. And certainly, if the one cast, I really do strongly recommend that anybody learns after the overhead cast is a reach mend to the left and a reach mend to the right. And all this is just a movement of the arm across your body or to the side of your body once you've cast.
Before the line hits the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you come to the stop and then you move it.
So you don't mend it while it's on the water then. It's in the position almost when it lays on the water straight away.
Yeah. Well, you have a cast and you have a mend, right? A cast, you can do all this with casts. A cast is where you manipulate the line before the stop, and a mend is when you manipulate the line either in or off the water after the stop.
Yeah, to mend your cast.
To mend your cast, yeah.
Yeah. Was there any others insects then, you said?
Yeah. Well, the olive upright is very, very... It doesn't happen on all rivers, but it certainly happens on the Usk.
Right.
You get the large brookdun, which looks very, very similar to a March brown, and is bigger than the March brown, believe it or not. But the difference is it doesn't have the black markings on its femurs, and it has like a yellow string on the front of its wing. And you can use March brown imitations for that, but a lot of people actually like to get that yellow bit in. So they make sure, and the size can make all the difference. Large brook duns and then August duns, what's known as August duns, and brook duns, right? They're coming through all the way through till October. Then medium olives, which is a smaller fly than the dark olive and a lighter colour. They start coming in April till October. You've then got iron blues, which I explained, coming in April. And I've been fishing for dark olives, and all they've been taking is the iron blues, but not seen so often nowadays. But again, between 11 and 4 in the afternoon. Pale wateries, which is, again, starts in April through to October, starts to intensify in May. A lot of people confuse pale wateries with yellow mayduns, but it hasn't got a bright yellow wing like the yellow maydun has. But probably one of the main patterns that you would use throughout the summer. Then you've got hawthorn fly, which is a terrestrial. But if you've got any hawthorn bushes by the river, which is the white flowered May, what people used to call May. Yeah. Trout love them. Yeah. Trout love them. And if you've got them on the water, they'll swallow them whole.
It's a great fly. I look forward to that when you fish the still waters.
Yeah, with a bibio.
Yeah, that's right. Well, would you know the difference why some are red legs and some black?
Yeah, because some are heather flies. Because all a heather fly is a bibio, right?
A hawthorn.
A hawthorn. It's the same species, right? But it's got red legs. That's why it's got the
so the But
not to be confused with cochibondu, which is the heather beetle. Which is a lot of people do get confused.
Yeah. So the hawthorn, as we all know, the black. So the red legs, what people called, which a lot of people think is a hawthorn, but it's actually the same family, but it's a heatherfly.
Yeah.
Why is it linked to the hawthorn tree then?
Because that's what it feeds upon.
So that's what it hatches off.
Yeah.
It actually comes off the tree.
It actually comes off the tree.
Yeah.
Whereas the heather fly
comes off the heather.
Comes off the heather.
Right.
Yeah. It's clear as mud when you know it. I mean, you can either touch all this very lightly and have a working knowledge, or you can get really deep into it. I mean, so if I give you an example with the sedges and the caddis, there are so many different species, some which are relevant for different types of rivers. So some will only emerge on chalk stream rivers, right, because of the way the bed is and the way the flow is, and some will only come off still waters. But you get some that are free moving as what they call caddis worms, which is your Acaphiliae and your hydropsyche, which are wiggly worms as caddis, right, which can also be impersonated as flies to fish lower down. But then you've got case caddis, where different species will make its protective covering from different materials depending on the species. So some will make it out of sand, some will make it out of bits of weed and grasses, and it's just fascinating. But there's one which is really relevant, certainly to the Usk, is the Microcutis. And this is tiny. But when you go down to the river and you pick up a stone, quite often it's got groups of like knobbles all over the stone, which are made out of stone themselves. And they're all enclosed. And that is the Microcutis pupa. And they hatch in their thousands, and trout love them. Absolutely love it. It's got sort of a when it's hatched as an adult, it's probably, I would say, size 20 to 18. It has got a khaki coloured body, which again is sort of teardrop shaped, with a greyish wing.
The easy way years ago was to actually spoon a fish. And
Yeah,
you see what's in it.
absolutely. And there's ways of spooning fish without killing them. Always brought out this sort of pipette, and what you do is you fill it up with water. It's got a squeezy bulb on the end with a tube you put down its throat, and you squeeze water into it, which washes out its stomach, and then it sucks it out, and then you can put it on a plate or a surface and squeeze it on.
It'd be just as easy to take you with us.
May to September, then you got cinnamon sedge, right, which is called because it looks cinnamon in colour. You've then got the Welshman's button, which comes out, which is another sedge, which comes out May to September. And then from May to September, you've got the mini caddis. And these can appear at any time of the day. They don't necessarily need to be at a particular time. From May to September as well, one of the most underrated hatches is the black gnats. And you'll see them all together in a group over the water. Just, again, a midge pattern can cover this. Works really, really well. From May to September, you've got beetles, and there's a lot more beetle patterns which are being used.
They would be terrestrial then, though, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. But if it catches fish,
yeah,
that's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got May to October, you've got yellow Mayduns coming off, as we discussed. Then you've got Duffer's Fortnight, May and June, which you've got what's known as the Mayfly.
Do you get those on the Usk much?
Huge hatches of Mayfly on the Usk now. I think it's mainly because of siltation. You've always had the species of yellow Mayfly, which has been lost in a lot of areas, but I do know areas on the Usk where it is. The differences between a Mayfly and other upwing patterns is that the nymph actually burrows itself into the bank and into mud, and that burrow can be up to 2 meters deep. And they once they're hatched from the egg, they go in and they burrow in there, and they stay there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got a 2-year cycle on the fly. It then hatches, and it's called Duffer's Fortnight because fish just gorge themselves on them.
Yeah.
But it's not as easy as people think. But
absolutely not.
But the best probably time to fish on the Usk is the spent spinner, or the spent gnat, as it's called, which is the Mayfly spinner, last thing in the evening.
Or, as you said earlier on, at dawn.
Yeah, if they're there at dawn.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why it's become so prolific on the Usk is purely and simply because of the sediment from farming practices where all the soils are running into the rivers.
Yeah.
So instead of all these fissures and bases, which were just solid rock or bedrock, are now filling up with silt.
Do you get them on the river? Like, again, I'm bringing up the Corrie, but the Mayfly there, obviously you get May. It could be like the start of May, the end of May, but you do get a good hatch for like 2 weeks or so. And then it goes quiet then, right?
Yeah.
July, you'll get another hatch of Mayfly, but they're a lot smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, that often happens. And I think that's nature's way of securing survival. You'll find that's where you get a lot of these hatches spread over a period of time. Because the eggs, and it's not the adults it's for the survival of the adults, it's for the survival of the eggs.
Not put your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Yeah. Following the Mayfly, you've then got Mayfly Spinners from May through to June. Again, that's 24 hours, but they do go on into June. And then really the quintessential fly, which is associated with all rivers, is the blue-winged olive. Distinctive to look at, bluish wings, blue smoky wings, lovely size, and that is there from June to September. Mainly hatches later on in the day, that's your evening hatch, if you like. And then 24 hours later or less, that's your spinners. And lastly, really, is the blue-winged olive spinner from June to September. Catch a lot of fish on that. All this information you can get through the Field Studies Council. They do publications. I'll give you the contact if you want. And
that's what you got there now, is it?
Yeah, £2 or £3, and they'll give you information on what to identify to make sure that the river's healthy. They'll give you stuff that explaining what the different types of caddis are. So you've got case caddis, and you've got caseless caddis, and then the different types of flat-bodied heptagenei, Batis nymphs, olive Batis. It's really, really quite interesting, and how you can identify what is a male fly and what is a female fly, which is all done on the tail with the pinchers on the tail for when they're mating. It's fascinating, and like with the gills of a blue-winged olive, they're on its back as opposed to its side. And once you start building in that understanding, you can do your own kick samples. Simple. All you need, you make your own seine net. You can get a couple of pieces of dowling and put some fine weaved cloth, such as, I wouldn't say silk, but something that will let the water through, but will hold it there. That works. One of the best things to do is go to a garden centre, go to their aquarium department, and for about £3 or £4 you can get a fairly wide fish net, scoop out net. Well, you put that near the bottom, kick the bottom up, you can do your own kick sample, and you can see what's exactly there. And when we're teaching kids, it's the first thing that we do, because they're catching something. And quite often they'll get some bullets in there and sculpins and a few fry, and then they're seeing all these insects moving about, and they'll actually see some of them hatch. And to them, it gets that instinct going, and they're really interested. It's a fantastic way to get kids involved, and adults as well. The one thing I will say is, we've got into depth in some of the insects and whatnot, and some of the breeding cycles. Really, if you take nothing else away from this, just remember the mnemonic GISS: general imitation, size and shape. Whatever you're looking at, it doesn't necessarily mean about colour, right? But whatever you're seeing on the river, if you haven't got a general description of that, so you could have probably no more than half a dozen patterns in your box, but in all different sizes, if you're correlating what you're putting on the end of your line to what you're seeing, and open your mind and think about your presentation, you will have as much success as anybody else.
Fishing and catching fish, I've learned, is quite simple. It's just made complicated by too many people writing different things about how many patterns used and lines, and I think when it comes down to it, it's just you and the fish.
Absolutely. The problem is you have got a fishing industry that needs to sell you tackle, lines, all sorts of different things, and a lot of the stuff sold is to catch fishermen, not to catch fish.
Absolutely.
And I think if you keep things simple, but once you've had a fish come up and go for your fly, whether you miss it or not, that's you hooked.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Dry fly is the cream, isn't it?
For me, I think there are great skills in all sorts of fishing, but the differences with dry fly fishing is it is so visual, and you become so immersed in what you're doing, and you can see the result all the time, whether a fish takes a fly or not. But what you're having to do is to cast the fly in the right way, in the right place, and allow it to fish as a natural, or move through the stream as a natural does. I think I explained last time. Flies are affected by the wind, so they always face into the wind.
Yeah.
So sometimes you've got to manipulate the fly so it faces it, or tie it in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? It's all about observation.
Well, thanks for sharing your knowledge and mine and information. I'm really looking forward to seeing your book when it's published.
Pleasure.
If this is your first time tuning in, make sure you catch all future episodes by clicking subscribe via the links on my website, castingwithkerryjones.com, or via iTunes or your favourite podcatcher. If you like what you've heard on this episode, feel free to drop me a line via my website. Tell me what you've enjoyed, ask a question, or better yet, tell me what you want to hear more of in the future. And if you're looking for additional tips, tackle reviews or venue information, or just want to see what's been hit in the back of my net lately, search up Casting with Kerry Jones on Facebook or follow me on Instagram. And if you still want more, I'm regularly uploading video content onto the Casting with Kerry Jones YouTube channel, so just check that out and subscribe over there too. Wherever you follow, subscribe, comment or message, I look forward to catching up soon for a good fishing chat. Well, I think that's all for now. So until next time, tight lines and don't strike too soon.